So our first speaker today is Natasha Dow Schull. She is an associate professor in the Department of Media, Culture, and Communication at NYU. Her talk today, Addiction by Design, From Slot Machines to Candy Crush, will draw on and push beyond that work. Please welcome Natasha Schull.
Thanks for the nice welcome. I'm honored to be here speaking among the other great speakers. And thanks so much to David for inviting me to share my work with you. We've been in touch for a few years, so it's a pleasure to do this kind of thing together. I'm a cultural anthropologist by training, and since the early 1990s, I've been researching how technological innovation mediates addictive behavior, and I've specifically been looking at innovations in the gambling industry, and now post-book looking somewhat at the sort of so-called social games domain, things like Candy Crush, to which I will give short shrift in this talk, but I'm happy to say more about in the Q&A. Here is a quote from recently. States are responding to what other states are doing. There's a lot of border anxiety. It's an arms race. So this is recent, but it echoes what was going on when I started this research back in the 90s. Another recession in which legislators in cash-strapped states were looking to commercial gambling as a way to raise revenue without raising taxes. So that's really been driving the expansion of gambling recently. And here is, this quote is actually from someone within the industry in 2008, right in the middle of this kind of latest recession. And he refers to this arms race. So if we think about it that way, the most lucrative arms in this race to raise revenue are modern slot machines. In the US, they're generating upwards of 3/4 of revenue from gambling. And so often in the public, it's frustrating to me to turn on the radio and listen to debates over should we bring gambling to this state, because what gambling are you talking about? There's so many diverse forms, they get lumped together. So in locals markets, meaning people who are, quote, unquote, repeat gamblers, that's terminology from the industry, those are on the rise around the country with the spread of gambling. And I thought I'd put this slide up to show you what an interior locals casino looked like in the 1990s. And you can sort of take this and just tweak the screens to look a little updated and more digital, and give you a good idea of today. In these places, slot revenues are upwards of 90% of revenue, not 75%. And they're so-called slot barns. And in Las Vegas, where I did my research, it isn't just in casinos, it's in everyday living spaces like supermarkets, not tucked away back behind the milk, but right when you come off the cash registers. They are in pharmacies. Here you have video poker right up there under drugs. And here you have gas stations. And what you can't, and I note here convenience gambling, this is also the term that is actually used to describe this kind of gambling. On the wall behind this gentleman in blue is a whole set of pamphlets that you can't read, but what they are advertising are Gamblers Anonymous meetings, over 100 a week in Las Vegas. And even a drug trial for video poker. Eli Lilly was trying out Zyprexa to see if they could expand its marketability. And I think this attests to the robust therapeutic industry that's sprung up alongside convenience gambling. So I started to attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings in the 90s as part of my research. And I was struck by the fact that almost everybody in the room, and the participants were not, the beret-wearing little old guys with their little notebooks for the racetracks. It was half women, and I'd say 95% slot machine gamblers. And each year it was a higher percentage, to the point where it was almost everybody in the room playing these machines, often video poker. So the more I listened to them talking, the more I realized that I couldn't understand what was going on as an anthropologist just by talking to them about their experiences or even observing them watching them as they played, but that I had to understand what was happening inside the machines. Why were these artifacts? I had to be more of an archaeologist maybe and less of a cultural anthropologist to do this project. So I expanded the scope of my research. I began to interview designers and marketers of machines at their manufacturing headquarters, and I began to attend the annual industry convention that you see here. Looks like a casino, just maybe better lit and more male-dominated. It's also heavily dominated by slot machine technology. Slot machines are commonly misperceived, and by whom? By journalists, by legislators, and by the public as being a so-called light form of gambling. Why? Low stakes, kind of like an arcade game. You have associations of cute little old ladies and children, women, retirees, et cetera. But in fact, today's gambling devices are widely considered by researchers to be the most compelling and potent form of gambling that's out there. And I try to get to the bottom of why that is in my book from 2012. The question that gets asked a lot in this conversation around slot machines and addiction is, does problem gambling stem from inside the device or from inside the person? I think this is the wrong way to frame the question. I sort of set out my book stating that and say, I understand addiction as a relational condition. Relational in the sense that you cannot have addiction without an interaction between a subject and an object, an activity, in this case, a technology. That it is never a question of inside either side, that it's always a question of between. The majority of research, vast majority on problem gambling, has focused on individual gamblers as the source of their problem. Their brains, their motivations, their genetics, psychiatric profiles, childhood, social factors, a whole array of things, ways that you could approach the person side of this interaction, even ethnic background. And in part, this has to do with the fact that this is different than other addictions where there has historically been moments of focusing on the drug itself, right? Here, there is no substance being ingested. It seems as if the behavior is being produced entirely within the person. But I think in larger part, it is because the gambling industry has done such a great job of strategically funneling funding in a direction that focuses on individuals rather than their products. I'm happy to talk more about that in Q&A, but I want to be clear after saying that I'm not suggesting that any of that research I just mentioned is flawed. Some of it is so interesting and so good. And I do believe that some people are more vulnerable to addiction, of course. By the same token, I think it's clear that some substances, activities, and technologies are more likely to addict, and that it makes sense we might want to look at those, understand their features, what's so compelling, and then have a conversation about how we want to raise public revenue or what we want to have in our adult arcades. Here's some things that slot machines have been called. Crack cocaine of gambling. Almost all journalists who talk to me want to get me to say that. They come at it from every angle. They're like, so would you say it's like the electronic morphine, so on and so on. Video gambling is the addiction delivery device. There's certainly a strong element of sensationalism here. There's also some empirical truth. Studies have found that people who play these machines repeatedly, as I said, known as repeat players in the industry, will become addicted 3 to 4 times faster in 1 year versus 3.5 years than those who participate in traditional forms of gambling like cards, sports betting, horse racing. The particular addictiveness of the modern slot machine, if you really wanted to boil it down, has to do with the solitary, rapid, continuous kind of wagering that they enable. And I'll talk a little bit more about the specific features that help produce that in a moment. But I did want to take, as a cultural anthropologist who's, it was the gamblers with whom I began this project, and so I'd like to give you a sense of their experience before I turn to the technology. So Gamblers describe what they call a zone of gambling addiction. They call it the machine zone. That this is a dissociative trance-like state in which they're so focused on playing the game that things like anything from their daily worries to social demands, and in some cases even bodily awareness fade away. Many gamblers told me how they'd be in pain, they'd start gambling. When their last quarter ran out, they'd sort of wake up, so to speak, and notice that they were in intense pain and hemorrhaging at the machine, things like that. That was one story, but this narrative of dulling pain, this kind of anesthetic effect of the machine I heard over and over. They really contradict popular understandings of gambling as a suspenseful, thrilling occasion of risk that's driven by a desire to get something for nothing. What they describe is being after nothingness itself. They regard the slot machine, ironically, as a very dependable, trustworthy, reassuring mechanism for getting to that zone of nothingness. Here's what one gambler said: "You're not really there, you're with the machine, and that's all you're with." And at the extreme end of the spectrum, gamblers will spend whole weekends in this kind of trance. One gambler I spoke to said he would forget the names of his children when he played. And here's a narrative of an addict describing how it feels to anticipate and then enter into the zone. It starts while I'm on my way to the casino. I'm in the car driving, but in my mind, I'm already inside, walking around to find my machine. In the parking lot, the feeling gets stronger. By the time I get inside, I'm halfway into that zone. It has everything to do with the sounds, the lights, the atmosphere, walking through the aisles. Then when I'm finally sitting in front of the machine playing, it's like I'm not really even there anymore. Everything fades away. So unlike live social games where you've got cues for quitting and sort of social interruption, this is an insulated, autonomous zone of play. So your sense of time falls away, a sense of monetary value, a sense of social life. And gamblers would tell me things like, oh, I get into such a rhythm that I make the wrong choices, like in video poker. I discard hands that are winning hands. And here's what that gambler told me: it was more about keeping the pace than making the right decisions. So contrary to ideas that gamblers are playing to win and that we can sort of fix problems by giving people lessons in probability that they missed in high school, this doesn't seem to be about winning big. That might be part of the initial allure and the hook that gets you in front of the machine, but as you interact with it and have repeated experiences with it, the allure of winning fades and the allure of the zone grows. So it's similar to other drugs, right, where the euphoria gets replaced by a kind of maintenance seeking or affect modulation. Some gamblers even become disappointed and irritated when they win a jackpot because it can freeze up the machine with songs, victorious songs. Suddenly people are looking at them, they're back in the social world, exactly where they don't want to be. And of course, if you win a jackpot and you're a gambler, you don't celebrate and get up and go. You just have more time on device, so to speak. Designers recognize this. Here's a quote from now the top international technology company in the world, the largest slot supplier. "Our best customers aren't interested in entertainment. They want to be totally absorbed, get into a rhythm." Thereafter, time on device, I just put that phrase out there. This is used so frequently in the gambling industry that it's shorthanded as TOD. And to them, it is a mode of machine gambling, less about risk, volatility, excitement, than about maintaining a hypnotic flow of action, which they've learned, they being the casinos, is especially profitable for them. So if gamblers seek this state called the zone, the objective of the industry is articulated as harnessing technology for, quote, continuous gaming productivity. And in the interest of time, I won't read this quote, but I've highlighted, what this means is faster, longer, and more. That's really how they are gearing their design, and design at all levels. So architectural, atmospheric, ergonomic, audiovisual, and game algorithmic. So I've just taken you through each of my chapters, sort of from the space down to the math. And at every level, it's to get gamblers to play more rapidly, more continuously, and for longer periods of time. So let me just quickly run through some of the features to give you a sense of how they work to modulate affect, to enable entry into the zone. Before you even sit down, or as you've just sat down, there's the money part, right? So this would be the incorporation of bill acceptors into slot machines so you don't have to put individual coins in. Again, less need to stop, right? In addiction speak, it enables a higher event frequency. And today, most gamblers are not even putting in large bills, but they're playing off of plastic player cards, and they can just go and go, even into the negative. So it makes the financial exchange nearly effortless. And so the idea is compress the greatest number of spending gestures into the smallest unit of time, and you're minimizing the opportunities for reflection and self-stopping. Just as an example from architecture, they are also mindful of never having right angles when you have to stop and be a choosing subject. I'm going to turn right to gamble. No, you want it to curve. Once you start playing, push buttons make the exchange even more effortless. You can just kind of tap your finger. Here is a quote from an industry representative, Bally. "A gaming machine is a very fast, money-eating device. The play should take no longer than 3.5 seconds per game," which can amount to 1,200 hands an hour. Buttons save not only time, also physical energy. This is another resource that the industry is increasingly concerned with, and that concern lies behind seating design. So this is a chair company, and I'll read you a quote. Its seats eliminate hard, sharp edges coming into contact with the main arteries of the legs, which causes circulation to be cut and the legs to fall asleep. So the flow of gamblers' time and money here is just directly linked to the flow of their time and money, or their circulation is linked to the flow of their time and money into these devices. Here's just a quote that I pulled out from the site. "Ergonomic design increases time on device." Moving from the chair to the machine itself, ergonomics continues to be important when you're thinking about console design. And here's a quote: "You want the person to be able to slide bills in there as easily as possible without raising their arms at all." "Building a better mousetrap" was the title of a panel on which the moderator said, "Ergonomics makes the slot player more productive." This doesn't look like anything to do from where you sit with slot machines, but it's an ad campaign by a top slot company in which they're concerned with giving players what they want. You could call this a kind of sensory ergonomics, what players want to see, hear, and feel. This is player-centric design. So you softly pixelate the video monitors, nothing too flashy and bright, not like in the old days with loud signs and lights zooming up at all angles. You want to create a little private viewing theater. You want to create, quote, acoustic cones. You want to sort of pull people in. You don't want to overstimulate them. One company's audio director made sure that all of the sounds on his machines, usually there's around 400, were in the supposedly universally pleasant key of C. So. And just very quickly, there's also haptics going on, touch screens that touch back. So it will respond to you depending on what action you take with snaps or pulses or vibrations. And you might think, how does this keep people in the zone? Isn't this like shocking them a little bit? But actually, the idea is that you'll give people, quote, a definitive transactional confirmation that will kind of reinforce what they are doing so that they'll do it longer. And here we are at the screen and what lies behind the screen, which really is the most important. So we've been looking at this, the kind of, I guess we'd call it secondary conditioning kind of things. But here we have this core mathematical structure of the game, which is embedded in the game algorithms, which are working in concert with a random number generator. And I heard over and over again, you know, we can keep talking about the colors and the seats and all of that flash, but actually math is what will make them stay. You can have the best machine in the world, but if it's not delivering on the right reward schedule, read reinforcement schedule, it's not going to be one that people play. So by math, that's really what's meant, that the particular game's reinforcement schedule has to be a strong one. And I'm just going to show this.
The pigeon learned that pecking the disc produced a reward. Then the behavior of pecking could be studied in relation to how often that reward was offered. Or in Skinner's terms, what was the schedule of reinforcement?
The main thing is what we call schedules of reinforcement. Reinforcement is what the layman calls reward, and you can schedule it so that a reward occurs every now and then when a pigeon does something. We usually use a response with a pigeon pecking a little disc, a little spot in the wall, and you can reinforce with food, but you don't reinforce every time. Perhaps every 10th time, or perhaps only once every minute or something like that. There are a very large number of schedules, and they have their special effects. And there is a good example of how you can move from the pigeon to the human case, because one of the schedules which is very effective with rats or pigeons is what we call the variable ratio schedule, and that is at the heart of all gambling devices and has the same effect.
So you might have thought, why? We already know this. This audience already knows basic behaviorist psychology. But I put it up there to, some people think it's heavy-handed if I bring up Skinner and draw that comparison, that it's sort of a too quick kind of thing. But in fact, in the 50s and 60s, and we see that here, Skinner routinely drew analogies, and he would often make this gesture because people didn't know what Skinner boxes were. They couldn't use them to explain the slot machine like I could. They actually needed to use slot machines to explain Skinner boxes. What today's technologically sophisticated machines do, they're not the same machines we see here from this old footage in Atlantic City. They basically take that formula and they intensify it. Actually, it probably is not Atlantic City. It's probably Vegas. So to strengthen the so-called holding power of games math with some of these latest innovations, companies staff departments of advanced mathematicians who are running what's called math farms to simulate the efficacy of different payout schedules. Some payout schedules are designed along the lines of what you'd think of with gambling, a kind of high risk, you're going for the win. It's called action gambling. This appeals to so-called jackpot players, play-to-win players. You're willing to lose and go through long dry spells because you're really going for a life-changing big win. You're going to persevere. You don't care about little stuff. There's another payout schedule which has come to absolutely dominate the market, and this is where profits come from, which is so-called escape gambling, where your players are playing to win to play. They are time-on-device players. And what they want is extended playing time more than winning, and they prefer games that dispense constant little payouts. These are often called drip feed games, cherry dribblers. They slowly nibble at your budget until it's gone, and you kind of don't notice as that is happening. So one thing I show in the book is how in the past couple decades, there's been such a focus on using digital technology to create this kind of reinforcement schedule. They actually put it right in the technical term. It's high hit frequency, low volatility. It sounds counterintuitive, low volatility gambling machines, but yet that's the formula. And it's a formula of design that works very well to pull gamblers into the zone that I'm talking about, the zone that addicts describe. A designer drew this graph for me on a napkin, and he showed how time on device is maximized as the risk of sudden losing streaks and the quick depletion of play funds is minimized. So an old three-armed bandit is that first spiky, but we've been moving to this kind of gradual, smooth slope. He went on in his interview to say, we try to design math that you can recline on like a comfortable couch. The profit logic here is sometimes referred to as Costco gaming. If you provide them with the right amount of time on device, they'll stay and play. If you take it too quickly and they lose, they'll leave. So quickly, what does such a game look like. One example is this new breed of the multi-line video slot. It's become wildly popular. These are the machines really driving revenue within that already large revenue share. Instead of restricting you to one line across, where you bet something and you will either lose it all or you will exponentially, double, triple your bet, the newer devices allow you to bet on multiple lines. This is from a patent. So not only straight across, but diagonal, zigzag, not here, but sometimes even horizontal. Here's what it looks like in color. Here you see, again, classic 1 line, a 3 line, a 5 line. That's really as far as you can go with analog mechanical reels. Once you've got video and digital technology in the mix, you can go much higher. This is actually outdated. This is from '05. This is 10 years old, this machine. You can wager on 50 lines. So you may be wondering, what is going on here? Why would such a game appeal to players? They do require significantly more coins, but they hit winning combinations with far greater frequency. It's a little like diversifying your portfolio. So it allows longer, less volatile play. And you can have this sense of sort of steadily, it's a steadiness, it's a smoothness. It's not the winning, it's not the fact that you're winning more frequently, it's the smoothness, that you're getting the same feedback, the same reinforcement every time. So I'm going to try now to quickly show you live what this looks like. So that's a win. You bet 20, you earn 25, you've actually had a win. Now let's experience what a loss is like. Total sudden, you're dropped, right? Just nothing. And here is this new breed, which really was not, which factually was not possible on 3-armed bandits. So identical audio-visual feedback as a win, but you've lost 16 coins. That's a large percentage. I think it's worth showing you a graph of outcomes on these. So we're choosing to bet on all those lines. And then let's just see how it looks over time. False wins is dominating actual wins, but if you add up wins and false wins together, that's the majority of your experiences. Losses is trivialized. But meanwhile, you're steadily losing, right? Because it's false winning. So that gives you a sense of some kind of complicated math. And I just wanted to wrap up my look at slot machines by, I've mentioned video poker a few times. So this high hit frequency, low volatility effect is achieved differently. You don't add reels and lines, you add decks of cards. So you've got triple play, 98. Then it gave birth to 5 play, 10 play, 50 play, 100 play. So it's like playing many, many machines at once. You choose your cards on one. Again, the diversifying your portfolio, you're distributing the risk, et cetera. So I make this argument in the book that there's a kind of tolerance structure at work in the evolution of game design, that kind of dynamic feedback loop where gamblers have this increasing tolerance to certain conditions of play and levels of complication. And then designers are responding with further innovations and kind of upping the ante. One gambler said, I keep needing more intensity, and the machines keep matching me. It's a kind of tolerance. And she actually referenced her former drinking and said it's like going from wine to hard alcohol to 120 proof. Another told me, at first the extra lines were a novelty. I wouldn't know how they'd change the dynamics of my play. Soon I would dismiss any machine that didn't have the extra lines. So following these gamblers, it isn't entirely that game innovations are driving their habits, nor that their habits are driving game design, but there's some kind of formatting and reformatting feedback that happens there. There's a kind of addictive structure to innovation. And this brings me back to my earlier comments about the importance of understanding addiction as a relationship, something that you cannot adequately understand by looking at one side or the other. And I would propose that, let's see if it's up here, yeah, it's not only about problem gamblers, but that it's about problem machines. And I don't want to suggest that it's evil, that the gambling industry is particularly unique in its tactics. We've seen today that it's not. It's very similar to the pharmaceutical industry, which we see as being in the business of therapy, as well as alcohol, et cetera. And they've learned many of their tactics from tobacco quite explicitly. They're not sitting around, though, and saying, how can we addict people? That's just not accurate. They are sitting around like people in any other business in our present-day market capitalism, and they are thinking of how do we increase revenue. And that shouldn't be surprising to anyone. It shouldn't be like, oh, these evildoers. Amongst themselves, they're freely, we might find it repugnant, but it's systemic, is what I'm saying. And they're freely discussing how they can keep gamblers playing longer, faster, and more. They're not even hiding that they're doing that. And that's really where the problem comes in, because through their efforts to increase revenue, they happen to have hit upon a product formula. They're not hiring neuroscientists to come in and tell them how to design machines. They don't need to. They've got this giant sort of pragmatic laboratory. They see what sticks, right? McDonald's, where are people which counter are they lining up? Which hamburger do they want? That's how they're figuring it out. And although they may not be targeting addicts, they're creating machines that are acting as an accelerant to the addictive process, whether or not that's their intention. And what's needed, I would argue, is some form of consumer, ignore that, some sort of consumer protection. I'm not talking about prohibition. I really liked what David said earlier, that there's a spectrum of coercion and a spectrum of regulation, and right now the two are out of sync. The gambling industry says we're the most regulated industry there is, but if you actually say, so what is being regulated? I can stand here confidently and say there are no guidelines in place to regulate or evaluate the addictiveness of any of the stuff we've looked at. False wins, wagering speed, use of credit rather than coins, the ability to play for long periods without interruption. Meanwhile, there is growing evidence that there are ways to mitigate the harmful effects of the problem. I don't have time to go into those, but they include slowing down reels, putting clocks on the screen, mandating that you stop after a certain amount of time. You could decrease bet size, remove bill acceptors, require loss limits. There's a whole host of factors, and a rich literature alone exists on what kind of messaging you might want to have. Do you want it to flash, scroll from left to right, top to bottom? I mean, there's really a meticulous, do you want the reels to spin at 3.4 seconds, 5.3? It's a little bit of a sort of technocratic conversation that can be exhausting, but I think it is worth entertaining the idea that there might be a way to, I feel that I'm out of time, so I should wrap up soon. But I wanted to put up the industry's objection to these limits. Their objection is on the basis of unintended consequences, and the idea is if we entertain any of these kind of limits, it's not going to work. Changing the machine doesn't help the person, all about the person. If you slow down the reels, people will play longer. We can't have technology-based attempts. In other words, don't touch our products. The central problem is not in the machine, it's in the person. Concentrate on helping the people who have the problem. Don't modify their behavior indirectly. And the last thing I'll say is the three reasons I think that this is really not a viable position and in many ways quite disingenuous. First, modify their behavior indirectly is the charter of the whole industry. That is what they're trying to do. Second, because some of the measures that I've reviewed may indeed have unintended consequences, it doesn't mean that all such measures do. And there's best practices out there actually by researchers looking at this and evidence that they do work. And so, I haven't talked at all about online stuff, but my last sentence, I promise, points to why those might come into play here. Because I think these devices and games like Candy Crush, even Facebook photo clicking, these are not ordinary commodities, so to speak, in the sense that you've got a consumer preference, you act on it, and then you're done with it. It's a kind of commodity in which the consumption of the product changes preferences and changes the willingness to pay for it. It's that describes addiction, right? So you need to have something, some kind of consumer protection in place. So I'll just go to my last slide and turn it off.
There's a new casino in Baltimore that the Medical Society was given a tour of, and they have slot machines where the waitresses will bring liquor to you at any time, but they've gotten permission to get a few of their machines on a balcony outside so that people can smoke, because you're not allowed to smoke in the casino. And the person giving us the tour said that those are their highest performing machines, the one in which people are allowed to smoke. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about why that might be.
Well, interestingly, I have a couple of short thoughts on that. I mean, Las Vegas, still you're allowed to smoke anywhere, and you'll see people, but what you'll see often, and gamblers themselves talk about this, that they'll start a cigarette and that over and over again, and these are heavy smoking addicts, it will just be all ash, and they're not actually taking drags, because something about the flow of the play sort of isn't even allowing the pause to engage in this other kind of addiction. And then when it burns them and they notice, they light another one, maybe they have a drag, and then it's going down to ash again. But I think the reason that they're the highest performing is that these are other, when you combine 2 or 3 affect modulators, alcohol, smoking, and the slot machine, it just reinforces, I think, that kind of zone sensation that they're seeking.
Thank you. Could you tell us a little bit about your current research, and in particular, are you finding evidence of the kind of hyper-calculating minds behind things like Candy Crush? Are there Las Vegas types who are transforming these new media?
Well, it's interesting because this word convergence, just like disruption, sort of makes me a teeny bit nauseous, and it's just everywhere. But in this case, convergence really does describe what's happening. That each of the very top slot machine manufacturing companies has merged with, bought out, or been bought out by a corresponding social game company, whether it's like Slotomania or Zynga. Zynga has teamed up with one of the top. And so the idea is that the future, a future where all of this is happening on Facebook and online is imminent. In some cases, it's already here, like in the UK, since the end of 2012 in the summer, you can actually gamble for money online. And I feel like the whole money issue is a little bit distracting in this, because it's not like nothing bad is happening online now, and the minute we allow people to gamble actual money, there'll be a problem, because all it means is that they will be able to take their winnings if they win. Right now, there's plenty of money involved. If you want to continue playing Bejeweled or Candy Crush once you sort of go in the gateway of free play, because free play is a gateway, once you're there, if you want to continue, you've got to, put mom's credit cards or the tokens. So it's no different than putting in a player card and playing off credit in a casino. So it's already a problem. So I think that, yes, it shouldn't go any further, but it's already there for us to talk about. And it looks a lot like slot machines. I mean, anyone who's played Candy Crush, they're just lining up rows of candy. And you could say the same about Facebook photo clicking in a way. There's a journalist in the tech, and he read my book, and he said, I'm going to try to apply this idea of the machine zone to those sort of holes we fall in on Facebook. That it's sort of, you can see it as a little kind of game or zone in Facebook. And he writes that what slot machines and Facebook share is the ability to provide fast feedback to simple actions, tiny rewards on an imperfectly predictable payout schedule. These are coercive loops, distorting whatever the original intention of the user was. What began as see a picture of person X becomes keep seeing more pictures. The mechanism itself becomes the point. So you see this kind of little tiny bitified habits often what I like to call nano monetized, because every little like and every little click has some value in this online economy, right? So it follows along with a profit model.
Gentleman over here.
So thanks again for that really terrific talk. I've got a little bit of sympathy for the industry's point of view that the regulators will always lose an arms race against the industry in regulating the devices. But this is an idea I've been developing around cannabis policy, and I want to see what you think about it for gaming policy. So if I want to gamble in Nevada, the rule would be that I have to show my driver's license and register my monthly loss limit, whatever I want it to be, but I have to register it now, and I can't change it for a month. That seems to me like a pretty good protector. Look, people want to pay to get in the zone. That seems to me like a reasonable choice to let them have. But if people are falling into it because they don't know they'll fall into it, and you let them set their own loss limit, then that ought to make this at least a safer consumer product.
Right, so that approach would be called the pre-commitment kind of strategy, and it's been tried out in a number of jurisdictions around the world, and overall it does have a good effect, but it requires, the problem is the black market of trading cards and your identity cards, and the casino industry has focused on that problem, even though it doesn't happen so much, at Walmart, they figured it out. Can't the casinos figure out how to actually track people through some identification signal? But they use that, they highlight that to dismiss the whole kind of pre-commitment system. But it works the same way, is that in order to play, you register and you actually set your own loss limits and your time limits, and you can go in the calendar and lock yourself out of certain days. Massachusetts has just passed gambling and started out really wanting, I think genuinely, to put something like this in place, but it has been sequentially, with every meeting of the commission, diluted. Oh, well, we'll have this there, but we'll make it voluntary. So you don't have to do it, And then for those who do it, if they want to stop, we're going to make it hard for them. Those who sign up and think this is the right thing to do, if they want to change, we're going to make them walk across the casino to a special kiosk. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to let them write with the button in the middle of a play session. I changed my mind, I want to keep going. So it's a little bit, it just becomes a token. But that doesn't mean that isn't a great idea.
That woman back there had her hand up. Oh, no, it's you. It's you.
Hi, thank you for a great talk. I have signed your book to a couple of classes and have to say it is one of the most harrowing accounts that I have read in recent years. One question that comes up from my students, related back to what you were saying about Facebook, is that there are other ways to get into the zone that are not quite so destructive to the addicts. So could some of those other ways, say playing some video games or Facebook or whatever, some of these other technologies that are developing to get you into a zone state, could they be used as a treatment, a kind of methadone for the people who are so addicted to the machines?
So I'll answer that question because it's an open question for me. I don't actually know what I think, but it is interesting that the gambling industry itself is following that logic, because as we experience so-called market saturation, where there's locals markets everywhere, you're not flying in and then leaving, you don't naturally have geographic distance. They're realizing, just as websites realized when suddenly, they no longer had a market to eternity of new customers and they could just sort of tap out their customers. In fact, they now are competing. It's so competitive, you have to kind of enhance your stickiness, keep your customers coming back. So it's this question of how not to tap out the market. So addiction is really a problem. So there's been this change toward a industry as helping you to moderate your addiction through algorithms, because all of this is being tracked in real time. And you can set your addiction algorithm to 95% accuracy before a person even senses it in themselves, that they're sliding into play that looks addictive, that it might be tending that direction. You can freeze up the marketing system, shut off the machine, dispatch a live counselor to bring them to an office and say, we don't want you, forget this GAAA stuff, never come back, abstinence. No abstinence, just let's work together. Let me draw you probability as a river. Let's like have that kind of conversation. Let's talk about a pre-commitment thing. Let's bring you back into a threshold so you can continue to be our customer for life. So I just put that, it's not a direct answer to your question, but it sort of is a thought exercise to what happens when we think about moderating these things through maybe less harsh, putting some kind of a net there.
Hi. In your reviews, have you found any correlates between people that play the slot machines like that and personality traits or characters or people that have been traumatized? Sort of like people that play the racetrack, or there's high correlation with narcissistic personality disorders. Mm-hmm. And second question, do they still pass out depends in the casinos?
Now, it is true that every night there are machines lined up that say, that have to be washed because they've been urinated on. And while it is true that plenty of people I talk to would wear Depends, I've never heard that they get passed out. I would doubt that by the casinos. But your first question just triggered my memory of the first part.
Are there any traits?
So as I said at the outset, as you might suspect I'd reply, I wasn't in the business of going in that direction in this project, and what I highlighted more was, so I made no effort to have a sort of statistically random sample or to kind of carve out different, I didn't take a sociological quantitative approach at all, so anything I'd reply would be anecdotal. And also it might have been the groups I fell into of Gamblers Anonymous. I did notice, yes, that there were certain patterns of trauma, but as I did this for 20 years, so it really changed. And what started out, from what I'm hearing, you could really say that there is something feminine about this, and that sexual abuse or traumatic pasts of a certain kind would dispose you to this, to want this kind of dissociated zone. But then you hear from like the long haul truck drivers, and not people. The other thing is women would often talk about it as a way to exit child care and elder care and just caring in general, and they were waitresses and nurses and they needed to get away from people, another kind of feminizing. But then you had like male truck drivers, no traumatic past, lonely, just with them in their machine all day, and they were seeking the zone. And you actually see, it's hard to parse class and race and who had what kind of past. I once found myself reading over transcripts, 2 transcripts, they got messed up, they fell off of my table. And I had real trouble figuring out which was which. One was from a high-earning business executive who lived in a gated community of Summerlin, a very posh place in Las Vegas. The other was from a single welfare mother in a trailer park who had 5 kids and literally was gambling the milk money. The words they used to describe this zone were identical. So I think there's many on-ramps to this zone, but there's something weirdly homogenizing about these machines and what they produce.
So we're going to take one more question.
So this is the one addiction I can think of that the people that are making money off it could theoretically create mathematics that would reduce addiction. Is this, and still make money? So is anyone working on a gradual, taper, a less rewarding process to get someone to the point where they're just bored by gambling?
You actually could, but the answer is that they're working a little in the opposite direction. So this is a fitting last question because what I didn't mention in my review of all the technology is the critical part that big data and tracking has come to play. And as the content inside these slot machines increasingly moves to the cloud, you can then dynamically respond to in real time to the gambler sitting there, because you don't have to change out a chip. It's a myth about the big dial in the back room of the casino. That was just too labor intensive. You can't change the odds in the middle of the session, but you can actually when it's in the cloud. And so people are working on these kind of algorithms that would learn your longitudinal play. It's sort of like key press data that they have from you about when you leave, what you respond to, everything about your preferences as a gambler. And they can say, oh, David is reaching his pain point. We need to shunt down to him a little boost. We're not allowed to by law, but we're going to shunt it through this marketing module, which isn't under that law. And then we're going to go around the back door and integrate it with the game odds so that it appears in the game. It's seamless. You don't know it's coming from the marketing module. For all intents and purposes, they've just run a big loop around. They found a loophole in the law. And so this is what people are trying to patent. Right now, but you could flip it the other way in therapy, right? You could sort of try to use that to extinguish behavior rather than to fuel it, I guess.